And now I will be happy to invite the first interlocutor of ours. The topic of their conversation, as Volodymyr has mentioned, cultural diplomacy and intercultural connections during the crisis, threats and uncertainty times. Our speaker will be Mr. Walter Zampieri, the head of the sub-program Culture of the program Creative Europe in the Executive Agency of the European Commission, and the hostess will be Olesya Ostrovska-Lyuta, the Director General of the Art Arsenal. So I'm happily giving the floor to them, and I invite you to watch it. Do not forget to leave your questions in the comments to the video. Good day. I'm happy to be here with you. I do hope that our first panel will be rather interesting and full of information. It will tell how the cultural relationship and diplomacy is considered in the European Union, which challenges we have connected with the pandemics today, and which changes we could expect because of the pandemics. So, our first speaker, Walter Zampieri, is he with us?
Zampieri, we are very happy to welcome you in Kiev. Thank you for joining us. We are privileged to have you here and to have your speech and presentation on the European Union and its perspective of international cultural relations. Thank you for being with us. How we work today. We will have a 20-minute presentation by Mr. Zampieri, and then we are going to have some questions. Any reactions and questions from our audience is very welcome. So, Walter, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning to all. It's a real pleasure for me to be here with you. I've been the pleasure of being in Kiev for another conference on culture. It was about 6 years ago. So I hope we have another opportunity to come back and to do it personally. Let me see if I can share our international cultural relations. Yeah, the very first question actually is why there is such a new strategy for international cultural relations? Because from a strictly legal point of view, there's no direct EU competence on this. Why should the EU do it instead of the member states? In fact, when it comes to culture, we took a long time in developing a cultural policy for the EU, and in particular. Why is that? Well, primarily because culture is it's so important. It's such an important matter for citizens that we had to do it very carefully, with some discretion. We started the policy only in 2007-2008. Before then, we had programs, of course. Also in development, for instance, the EU is a very important donor in the rest of the world. Within Europe, it took some time, actually. It took some time because we needed two things, really, to find out, to understand. One is the real role of culture for society, for the economy, for international relations, and also in particular, what was the place of the European Union for this. And the answer is that you can also find it in my current job, which is the Creative Europe program. We saw that our role is to establish cooperation. We created this space for interaction, for projects, for bringing together artists and cultural organizations so that they can cooperate and produce something new. And this is our particular role. So that's why, when it comes to international relations, we do not prefer the term cultural diplomacy, but rather international cultural relations. What is the difference? Well, diplomacy means something done by the states. It's always an agent of the state, a diplomat, typically, who proposes a message or some actions or reaches out to the public. With international cultural relations, instead, we will encourage artists and cultural organizations to come together. Really, the key point is cooperation. This is what we do. We created within Europe an open space for cooperation, and now we are trying to expand it really to the rest of the world. The key words are reciprocity and mutual understanding. As I said, it took some time. No, this is what you can see. It's quite a long sentence. I understand, but this is quite important because it comes from the Foreign Affairs Council of the European Union from last year in 2019. So we clarified what is the foreign policy of the European Union, and then we also clarified what is Union action, what we do in the area of culture. Support, coordinate, or supplement the actions of the member states. When it comes to foreign policy, we look at the identification of questions of general interest, and we decided that culture was one of the questions of general interest, and the member states should try to ever increasing their convergence in terms of actions. In practice, what is it that we do? This is, it was a long document, but I believe this is the most important part, really. The fact that with common projects and joint actions, we put together the member states, the diplomats, of course, the cultural institutes, UNIC, which is the umbrella organization. Most people, of course, are aware of it. The umbrella organizations of the European Union National Institute of Culture, our delegations, for instance, in Ukraine, and importantly, the local stakeholders. Because what we are trying to do will always be on the basis of a common vision that we have developed with local actors, with our friends. It started in 2016 with a joint communication. Joint means because of the External Action Service of the High Representative at the time, Federica Mogherini, and the European Commission. I was told by experts that this is the only document, the only political document that an international organization or even a state had come up with such a strategy on international cultural relations. You can see cultural diversity, respect for human rights, mutual respect, intercultural dialogue. All these things are exactly what we try to do within the European Union. A cross-cutting approach, the fact that culture affects different impacts from social policy to the economy, intercultural dialogue, and so on. And we believe that the same approach can also be applied in the field of international relations. As you see, the European Union works on three streams: sustainable social and economic development, quite important for us, intercultural dialogue, and peaceful intercommunity relations, what explained before as social coherence, but it's more precise now, and cooperation of cultural heritage. Cultural heritage has a special place, because it has a symbolic importance for people, for citizens, and it can also be a great means of developing, of strengthening international ties, if done in the right way, because exactly because it has symbolic value, it can also lead to strengthening identities and actually could divide us, instead of putting us together. So it is quite important. This is a presentation of how we see things can link together, intercultural dialogue, economic growth, peace building, cultural heritage, diversity. And as you see, is what we are trying to do for the European Union. Absolutely key is the role of cooperation. I mean, the European Union is, by definition, in our DNA, we are multilateralists. We are a multilateral, in the end, entity. So we need to bring people together. The cooperation with the national cultural institutes, essential. The role of the EU delegations, us, and promoting active civil society. This is really the shift to international cultural relations, from cultural diplomacy. It is because of the nature of the European Union, or what we do. There's nothing wrong, obviously, with cultural diplomacy, but that's primarily the role of the member states, of the national cultural institutes. On the other hand, we also need to admit that the world has changed. No? There are global networks, everybody's talking to everybody else. There are an emergence of non-state actors. So all these things explain that, at least for culture, it makes much more sense to help and encourage the artists do their own job and cultural organizations to do their own job. Our role as bureaucrats is just to support them, no? To create the space. A particular importance is the cooperation with the national cultural institutes, of course. You also have a great example in Ukraine, actually, with our own, with the projects starting with Culture Bridges and now with the House of Europe. But we started really with an arrangement, an administrative arrangement with UNIC directly. Enhanced cooperation between delegations and their institutes to test the methods. We started in 2017. Ukraine was a first example. Others that I've chosen are Brazil and Egypt, because really there were examples of cooperation with the local stakeholders, where the delegation, the cultural institutes, and the local stakeholders developed together what should be done in the future. Vista has developed in the future. No? It has become the Houses of Culture, which was a preparatory action that we are running together with the Parliament. And then it has become now the European Spaces of Culture. The change of the name is simply that we do not want to give the impression that we want to build, a big building, a big house physically. What we propose is also really to establish the cooperation. It could be virtual or online, it could be a serial of a long festival, a week of Europe, or so on. And the work with UNIC has continued, as a matter of fact. No? From the beginning, they selected a number of pilot projects, of tests, then they did their own consultations. Now I think there are 6 pilot projects. No? In Benin, Guinea, in Ethiopia, even in the United States, and so on. And we are establishing this, and we will continue to do it with our next phase of the Creative Europe program. In the case of Ukraine, I think you have a very, very already well-established House of Culture, so it will continue definitely like that. The role of the EU delegations is quite important, and there was a very long discussion with our member states in the Council, no? Exactly because, as I said, culture is a competence of the member states. So there should not be cultural attachés of the EU in our embassies, but still we offer and we prepare a platform where the different cultural attachés of the member states and the different cultural institutes come together and meet the stakeholders. We provide I'm not saying a mediator, I would say, but we are a little bit of a coordinator, no? A facilitator. We try to facilitate their own activities. Since I continue with this short history of EU policy, in 2018, we also proposed a new European agenda for culture, which was welcome and well received by the member states, by the parliament, and by the stakeholders. No? We are always supporting social cohesion, cultural participation, which is a bit of an interesting aspect. No? We want to support cultural participation because it's, we are noticing that there is a decrease in cultural participation in traditional activities. In a sense, that's because, of course, there are new media, new forms of communication. But we really want to support not just active, participation, going to the cinema or going to the theater. We really would like people to develop their own artistic abilities. So education was also quite important for this. And for international cultural relations, we want to continue our approach that I have explained, the potential in particular for sustainable development and peace. A new strategy that we have put in place now is for the West Balkans. For instance, during the summer, despite the pandemic, my agency, my unit, has launched a special call for cooperation cultural projects in the West Balkans and with the rest of the EU. It was a smallish call, it was about 5 million euros. But let me tell you that we received more than 300 applications. So it's quite extraordinary. It's quite extraordinary the response that we receive from cultural organizations in the West Balkans. So it's too bad that we didn't have enough money to fund all these projects, but still it's quite important, the signal that we have received, what is the demand really for cultural cooperation that we have seen. I've just said quite a few things about all the advantages, all the things that we are doing, but I think that in a forum like the one that we have today, it's also good to ask the difficult question. Does it really work, or is it just icing on the cake? Does it work is a difficult question. It's a difficult question because evaluation is always very difficult when it comes to culture. It's very difficult to evaluate what are the actual impacts. So we don't know really if we are really achieving the advantage of social cohesion or even of economic development. I mean, we have certainly evidence that culture is an important industry. Many jobs in Europe and in the rest of the world are linked to culture. But our programs, the money that we spend for taxpayers, is it really effective? Well, we don't know. We don't know, simply because it takes time. It takes time because this is about people to people. As I said, it's about cultural heritage. It's about building communities. Building communities takes a little time. It's not so easy to show the impact. But we do have some indications. We have indications, in particular because this is what makes me optimistic, actually. That whenever, every year or every 2 years, we have Eurobarometers, where basically we poll the citizens of Europe about important questions. And we often, almost always, ask, how do you create a feeling of community among EU citizens? And culture always comes top, always comes first. It's quite relevant, I think. Geography means your neighbors. Economy, obviously, very important. Values, history, but culture is the most important. Now, if we can create this feeling of community among EU citizens, I think it also works at international level. So I'm quite confident that indeed, through culture, we can develop a better international relation climate. And for instance, in just a couple of days, this week, Thursday and Friday, there will be another important conference in Brussels. Unfortunately, it will be online, obviously, given the situation. And it will be about the case of Iraq. So not an easy place to work as a cultural organization. But we are explaining all we are trying to do to protect cultural heritage in Iraq, how we are trying to foster inter-community relations when it comes to cultural heritage. We are using cultural heritage in order to bring a sense of ownership, not just of your own national identity, your own community in Iraq, but also about really building bridges between the different communities so that they can have a shared cultural heritage. And of course, we also support the physical protection. We support the creating the infrastructure. And it's quite important also, this is Iraq, so there were also aspects of counterterrorism, fighting ISIS, and so on. It was quite important to develop an overall strategic framework, which we proposed and which was accepted by the most important donors also, like UNESCO, an essential stakeholder in this, but also other donors like the Gulf states and the United States itself, and of course our own member states participated very actively, from Germany to the UK to France and so on. So I'm quite optimistic about the future outlook on international cultural relations. So thank you very much for this initial conversation, and I look forward to continuing our discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Walter. It was truly interesting. And I want to ask you a few questions. One is based on what you've just said. And you said literally, our role is to establish cooperation. There is a discussion in Ukraine about the difference between cultural cooperation, cultural relations, and cultural diplomacy, about what is more efficient in some way to present or to cooperate. But you said, we will come to it a little bit later, but now I would like to ask you the following. Cooperation needs a lot of capacity from both sides. And Ukraine is relatively a new country compared to, let's say, all the European nation states. And in Ukraine, international cultural bodies such as Goethe Institute and British Council have been very helpful and instrumental in helping to build capacity of the independent sector. However, there is a lot in front of us still to achieve. So what is the role of European community then in helping to build capacity in those countries that are the part of those dialogues that you've just described? Building capacity.
But yes, how can I say? There are two aspects. No, one is we provide, as European Commission, as European Union, we provide the space, no, for cooperation, which could be, for instance, Creative Europe. Now, I know that it's not always easy to participate and to win, to participate in a project of Creative Europe. I know it very well. I know it every day that some member states, for instance, are more apt at getting the award, simply because of time. They have a longer experience. Sometimes it's also big countries, and so on. We provide the space, yes, but we also need to provide more capacity building, and that's, for instance, what was done with the Eastern Partnership program for quite some time. And now it's very important to involve the big national cultural institutes, because what they are doing is quite essential. The part of a partnership, for me, is the most important part of our approach to international cultural relations. Capacity building, yes, but also the possibility for participating in a dialogue with the other artists and organizations. And I would say it's not always important to be the coordinator of a big cultural project. It's quite important to participate simply as a partner, because we learn more. You take less of a bureaucratic burden, which is quite important for the coordinator, but then you will develop, and you will develop new ties. And I would say, let's really have confidence. Let's hope on what Ukrainian artists, Ukrainian organization can make, because there's an extraordinary demand. And I think that if we leave them the opportunity over a little time, I think there will be great results. There are already very good results, honestly, with Ukraine. We need to do more, absolutely, absolutely.
Yes, and as you've said, capacity building goes through participating. The more we participate, the more capacity we develop. There is a very important way of thinking, which is becoming more and more dominant in a way in Ukraine. Well, can you elaborate a little bit on that? What is the role and place of Ukraine in your policies as European Union?
I mean, in terms of EU policies, I can say that the development of stability of Ukraine was, I think, the second top priority of the new High Representative when he presented Mr. Borrell, he presented at the European Parliament. So I don't need to say how important Ukraine is for the European Union. When it comes to how we can cooperate for culture in particular, for Creative Europe, if we look at the 7 years, let's say, of the Creative Europe program, no? Only for cooperation projects, we have supported, I guess, more than 3,500 organizations. These organizations create a network. And that's what I think Ukraine could do. Even if you start, and you started obviously very small, basically, because that's what happens at the beginning, no? But over time, you're getting better. And participating in these organizations is not just a one-off. It's not because you receive, I don't know, for 3 years a grant. You have established a network with other partners in Europe. You're becoming part of our conversation, which you already are, and you're ever expanding your participation. That's really what you should do. I think just give yourself a little bit more time, a little patience. I know, of course, the times are very, very difficult. Right now, it's difficult for everybody, but hopefully it will get better soon. And I'm sure there will be another huge explosion of cultural activity because there's such a pent-up demand. So what you should do is really to continue. And if you need more help from us, let's keep our very good dialogue that we have, for instance, for the desk for Creative Europe. We have a constant dialogue with them. And let's hope, to be honest, this is what I really hope, that we will soon finish the negotiation about the next 7-year budget of the EU, because for the moment we simply do not have a budget as for January 1st, not alone the participation of non-EU countries. They are in the legal basis, so it will happen, but for the moment we simply do not have we don't have a piece of paper, we don't have a document, and we don't have the budget. So, but I know that the co-legislators, Council and Parliament are working hard on it.
It's even hard to imagine how to negotiate a budget today in times of COVID. So I would like to come to that question a little bit, because one of the pillars of the EU policies is mobility. And mobility for people, and mobility for artists. What happens to this pillar, to mobility, in times of COVID, and how does the pandemic change the policies? What do you see in the future regarding the EU cultural policies?
Well, it has been extremely difficult, obviously. We all know that not just in EU, I think also in Ukraine, I've seen some figures. The impact has been very, very terrible for cultural activities in particular. I mean, the cultural organizations, cultural activities were among the first ones to suffer from the impact of the pandemic, of lockdowns, of quarantines, and so on. And we also know that it will take some time to go back to normality. Inevitably, I mean, like other industries, these are industry about people, about gathering people, no? People to contact. So there is a terrible impact on this. It's clear. So the first reaction is always, and I'm not exaggerating. It's really to keep people alive, no? People alive and developing safety nets. So most member states immediately trying to keep some safety nets for making sure that, for instance, unemployment benefits were extended also to artists and so on. What we try to do in terms of Creative Europe and of all the other programs of the European Union was to make sure to help that the projects stayed alive, so that also that we could continue paying what we are doing. We have provided the most flexibility we could. We changed the work program, changed all the deadlines. We changed the program, meaning that what had to be physical has become online. Of course, we kept paying the staff costs of people. And I can say that my unit runs about 700 projects every day on a daily basis. So we receive hundreds of changes of the contracts with them quite well, because only one project until now has folded. Only one out of 700. So it's quite, it means that we are doing something well, basically, if we are keeping them alive. Now, what will happen after that? Well, first of all, I'm really convinced that cultural activities should resume immediately, exactly because it's about the fabric of society. It's about people talking to each other. It's about thinking. So it has to continue. And there will be a huge demand. There's a pent-up demand for overcoming isolation, basically. Lockdown, quarantine means isolation. But there will be a huge role for culture to rebring people together and to rebuild our society, in particular for social coherence, for social cohesion. I see a role for local government, and I see also the digitalization, of course, has been the great remedy, what kept them alive, no? What we're doing now, right now. The crisis, in a sense, has also taught us not just something sudden, which happened to us, no? A tragedy, but in a sense, it's also an amplifier of some trends that were already present in society. One that has become even clearer is some aspects of our economy, what they call the gig economy, that so many people were not protected. Until now, maybe it was something we discussed, but now it's evident. It's very clear. So all member states in the European Union were thinking about this now. How can we extend some protection to a big chunk of workers who are not protected until now? So this is one important aspect, in particular because artists very often are simply self-employed, or they even have another job, and so on. So this is one aspect which we will need to look very carefully. Right now, of course, we need to keep them alive, but we also need to look at the trend. What does it mean? And the other is digitization, of course. Now, digitization is a great means of really continue our dialogue. I do really think that no, we will need also to go back to physical activity, not just because some artistic practices need a physical connection, but it's important for us not to stay really humans and connected together. And I'm really sure there will be an explosion of this demand. But digitization, of course, has its advantages. So we can see, for instance, that technical meetings don't need to be held in an airport. I mean, they can also take part online. And again, let's give some confidence to the artists, because I think there are huge possibilities of developing new art, new creation through online and digitization. So that's another aspect which was already happening, of course, but now has become even more relevant.
Thank you. You've just given us a very optimistic perspective about what is going to happen, that we are going to overcome the pandemics and we are going to get together physically again. But what is the most pessimistic view? What would be the steps of the European Union in case if we are not able to come together physically, let's say during the next year? So what would be the approaches?
Well, I mean, I'm optimistic on the basis of science, on the basis of vaccines being developed, about therapies and so on. I'm not 100% optimistic about the possibilities of going back to normality in a few months. No, it will not take a few months. It will take a longer time, simply because you need the time to build the vaccine, to really communicate, and to logistics is going to be a huge challenge. I mean, it's the whole planet, basically, that means to find a vaccine or a therapy. So it will take time. It will take, I believe, until the next summer. So we really need to stay alive, literally, for all these months. Still, I mean, we need to look at the future. Even the most terrible plagues and epidemics in the history, they were overcome. So we will overcome, and we will come back to this. We need to be optimistic. About the European Union, I mean, there was a historic agreement in July between the heads of state and government. So if we do not have yet what we call the MFF, the whole budget for the next 7 years, it's because it's so important. I mean, it's such a historic step that was taken by the heads of state, no? So it's, and they will find an agreement. They will find an agreement because it's a huge amount of money that will also be spent to protect citizens, to protect the economy, and to protect our societies during this period of pandemic and the crisis that will follow, the economic crisis that inevitably will also follow. So I'm, how can I say, fingers crossed, but I'm I'm optimistic for the future. I'm worried about the present, let's say. Yes, this would be the slogan.
Thanks a lot about this ray of optimism. Let me elaborate a little bit on what you've said at the end. You believe that culture is extremely important also in times of crisis. So can you give us a little bit more of your thoughts? Why culture is important even in times when the crisis is so hard as we have today? Why culture?
This is a crisis of, obviously, I mean, there's the health aspects and so on, but there's a crisis of isolation, crisis of people, literally. I mean, I've been basically in my house since March, basically, because I can go to the office once every 2 weeks or something like that, and now not even more. I cannot do it, so we're locked here. The children are studying online. It's quite a challenge. But really, if you look at what people are doing during the lockdown, is the consumption of music, consumption of films, books. Culture is really what is keeping alive, also mentally. I mean, mentally speaking, this is what culture really keeps alive. So that's why I'm so optimistic. There is this need, human need, for connection, which will remain even more important. We still need to find the right solutions. We still need to find the right means. But that's why I really believe that we should use these months also to really look at what the artists are doing, what are their ideas. There's a huge amount of ideas that are put on the internet, conferences, visual arts, for instance, also can be found there. Obviously video arts and so on, concerts. Let's really look at what they're doing, and let's elaborate in the future how these different means can come together. And it could be, I'm sure there's a lot of fantastic ideas, what I've seen already. For instance, I see festivals. Festivals were devastated, obviously, during the summer, because summer, it was impossible not to bring people together with social distances. I mean, to meters, you have maybe 20% of the spectators. What they're doing now is trying also to establish followers, to become, instead of an event, let's say every 2 years, to become a movement over time. You have your followers, there will be always activities and events online, and really try to develop a community, which is really what culture should be doing.
Very nice. These are very nice words. Culture is based on the human need for connection, as you've just said. Let me stress once again a very important moment of your speech, that European Union's approach is based more of international cultural relations than on cultural diplomacy, more on building dialogue than presenting yourself to other nations. I think this is one of the most important takes of this conversation today. But I have been joined by the colleague, by Irena, on the stage, and Irena has questions from our audience.
Yes, I do. So, Walter, maybe if you want to comment what Olesya just mentioned, you can. And meanwhile, I would like to ask several questions from our viewers. So the first one is about traditional and non-traditional practices. Someone says that we are now very focused on innovative and non-traditional approaches and practices and forms, but maybe we should pay our attention to traditional forms and traditional practices, because we see the decline of participation in them. So maybe we should focus on traditional practices instead of finding so many new innovative and unusual forms and projects. So what do you think about it?
I agree only up to a point. I mean, I do believe that traditional artistic practices need to be encouraged, absolutely. On the other hand, I see the problem is more in the audience, if I can be more brutal, because from my observatory, the most important in terms of size, in terms of fund that we go to them, it's theater. Theater is so traditional theater is where we put a lot of money. So music, concerts, and so on. On the other hand, what we see is this decrease in the participation of the audiences. I don't think it's a matter of price. Maybe younger audiences have changed their attitude, their approaches. I don't know. I used to go to opera regularly. I had a subscription. And as you can see, I'm not terribly young, but I'm the youngest in the audience normally. So there is something there that we really need to work more to get the audiences back, absolutely. And that's what we're trying to do, audience development, audience building. You really need to find, I believe now, we really need to find an audience. And maybe you don't need to be innovative in your traditional practice, but definitely you need to be innovative in looking for the audience. Yes.
Thank you, Walter. I would like to agree with you. I think that current times require us to find some innovative approaches to attracting our audiences. And one more question from the audience, from our viewers, about the platforms, databases of digital cultural projects in Europe and by country. Are there any places, are there any platforms maybe created by the EU programs or whatsoever? Can our viewers, how can our viewers find these platforms to get access to that information? Maybe you could share some advice.
Yes, actually, we had created, but the problem might be that there are too many platforms, as a matter of fact, because the fragmentation is also a problem. No, we did create a platform for our. It was Europe at Home. Okay, if you Google it and you find all the projects, all the activities that were put on this platform, and you can find what they're doing. And it goes from from postcards of old and renovated synagogues, let's say, in terms of cultural heritage. But then you also have the events, the concerts in particular, and the local festivals, online festivals, and so on. Yeah, we do it. And of course, YouTube, frankly, is also, you cannot forget, I mean, the big platforms, or Vimeo, of course. So we created our own, and maybe the problem is that there are too many, let's say. But I will be happy to send you and to the organizer some links for what we have done.
Thank you. We would really appreciate that, and we will share these links with our colleagues who registered for the event. One more question from the audience is about the civil society institutes and organizations. What is the place of civil society initiatives and organizations in the development of international cultural relations? How do you think?
Yeah, as I said, it's an essential role, because what we do really is to try to help them, to support them to do their own job, to establish relations with other organizations, other societies in other countries. On the other hand, it's very difficult, obviously, by definition, because when I talk to states, to the member states at the council, I have 28, maybe 27 from now, representatives. Now, a representative of civil society for culture, in particular for a world level, it's too difficult, simply too difficult. I don't know how to do it. So in a sense, I'm also looking for ideas, how we can further strengthen our dialogue with civil society. What we do it is through networks, in Brussels at least, where there are umbrella organizations that covers really a lot of Europe, the wider Europe, but also sometimes the world. I mean, Europa Nostra for heritage, Nemo for museums. So we support networks, and we have a constant dialogue with them. But yes, it remains a problem. It remains a work in progress. Yeah.
Thank you for mentioning the networks. I think I also have one resource of one EU program that collected European database of European networks. So I think we will also share this link with our audience. This may be helpful for them as well. And a last question, last but not the least, is about digitalization. How do you think if cultural institutions are ready for this digitalization? And do you, as a representative of EU, does European Union have have plans for development of local digital platforms to develop intercultural dialogue?
Well, first of all, I mean, it was a huge impact for everybody, for us, but also for the cultural institutes. I think I saw some study, maybe 85% of their activities were closed during the crisis, ongoing right now, so it was a huge impact for them as well. The digitalization, let me go back to the fact that I think it's that there are huge possibilities that are not really fully deployed for digitization. I went to Linz 2 years ago to see the museum with Ars Electronica, and there are fantastic things that they do for with digital means, with science and art, and so on. There are fantastic ideas that we need to be developed. So are we developing a new platforms? Well, let's see with the next program, because digitization will be a priority, obviously. So let's do what we can do. We work also together for research. I mentioned Ars Electronica. It's a prize that we do every year here in Brussels, but comes really from the whole of Europe, from all the participants of Horizon 2020, the big research program. So it's open to the rest of the world, as a matter of fact. And there are fantastic ideas. So we really need all of us to develop more. Also, how we can communicate the results. So the question of the platforms is quite relevant, because we have many results. There are also too many smallish platforms, let's say, and we really need to improve the communication. And thank you very much also to the cultural institutes, because it's a great work that they're doing.
Thank you very much, Walter, and thank you, Olesya, for such an interesting conversation, and thank you for your messages about culture as something that is always important, even in times of crisis. We'll be happy to receive any additional information which you would like to share with our audience, with our viewers. We will send all the information to everyone who registered for the event. Thank you one more time, and now I will switch into Ukrainian. Дякуємо.
Thank you again, our dear guests, Ms. Olesya Ostrovska-Lyuta and Mr. Walter Zampieri, for such an interesting speech and interesting insights. Olesya, maybe you'd like to conclude, or maybe to sum up, or to mention some of the main topics which were lessons taken after this conversation with Walter. Thank you so much. First of all, I'd like to say that it's really a very relevant discussion. Secondly, my main three conclusions are that it's rather important, thinking about the cultural interaction, cooperation in the cultural sphere with the help of the culture at the international arena, it's important to think in the categories of cooperation more than just presentation of ourselves. The cooperation is much more productive, definitely, to create your own internal cultural capacity and capability, and to tell about yourselves as a society, on the one hand. On the other hand, this cooperation claims lots of capacities. What's in English is named capacities, in fact. So these capacities need to be developed. It is developed, as just Mr. Zampieri said, through the participants in the networks, in the various and diverse competitions, and in the cooperation. We haven't had this long way so far of this international cooperation just because we are not that old country so far, but this is what we need to deal with further on. And the third optimistic conclusion, which I also made out of this conversation, that in spite of our overcoming of such complicated times because of coronavirus, still we are getting ready to the discoveries and openings. Very soon we are awaited for the decrease of physical contacts, but for half a year or the year maybe. This demand for physical contacts will increase, and the culture is one of the spheres where people are interacting, where they share. So the culture will be even more important after the pandemics. Those are my three main conclusions. Thank you, Olesya. And we will go on. And before we go to the next panel discussion, we'll have several minutes of the break. But until you haven't left, I would like to remind you that you can also, for each speaker, for each panel discussion or our participant, you can pose any questions, and to ask them, write them in the comments to the both video broadcasts at our Facebook page. And also I remind you about the question what cultural diplomacy is. The link is also mentioned in the comments to the video. Please join us and share your opinion what it is.